Hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Tracy Ihezai. We're reaching you from Development Dynamics Studio. Our focus of this podcast is on a region that is rich in natural resources but burdened by decades of environmental degradation, the Niger Delta. Now, for years, oil spills, gas flaring, and industrial waste have devastated the ecosystem, threatening both biodiversity and the livelihoods of millions who depend on the land and water. The Ogoni cleanup, launched as a landmark initiative, promised hope and a fresh start. But here's all: how much has truly changed? Is the ecosystem really being restored, or are we witnessing another cycle of delay and broken promises? Joining me on this podcast is Dr. Akin Oke, Leadership and Innovation Strategist and co-founder of Easy Data Consulting Limited. So you're welcome to Development Dynamics Studio.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's just get into the basics. How did the Niger Delta get into this ecological crisis?
So like we say in Nigeria, that will probably be a tough jump question. We're all aware of the decades of degradation occasioned by, oil spills for many years in the region. And so this has been the source really of the degradation that we're talking about and we're trying to clean up. This would go way back in history in terms of the activities of some of the oil companies, especially Shell, that's getting held corporate. And Shell, of course, is a joint venture between Nigerian government and Shell. So this is something that has been part of the bad practices around the oil industry that we've had. And it's been such that it's left the region in such a very badly devastated state, so that the level of pollution is probably insane anywhere else in the world. That's why there is a moral reason for us to pay attention to it, so that we can alleviate the suffering and as much as possible restore the region. And so when you say what's the source, it would be bad practices. But when you look at it from the point of view of the oil company, they will say it's also because of sabotage for years of agitation in the region and how this has also been handled. So we've got to be fair. There's a lot around some of the negligence and the practices there, but also out of the frustration of the people, they've also taken some degree of culpability in terms of, look, we can't allow you to access this anymore. And so sometimes when there are spills, nobody is there to go there and turn things up. So it's a long history. It's a fractious relationship between the oil company and the communities. And this has led to all forms of challenges. And the one that really touches you is the fact that as bad as the life expectancy might be in Nigeria, Ogoni particularly, the Niger Delta in general, has even way lower life expectancy than the rest of Nigeria. I think sometimes some statistics put it like 10 years lower. So if Nigeria has, for males, say, I think 55, yeah, that means for the Ogoni male or the Niger Delta male, it's about 10 years. That stays in Niger Delta, by the way.
That is scary.
Because most of our Niger Delta folks, of course, have second addresses.
All right, talking about the Ogoni cleanup, what is really the vision behind the Ogoni cleanup, and how can you say that has evolved over the years?
Okay, so my claim to fame in terms of the Ogoni cleanup came around 2015, 16, all the way to 2020, when I was the country coordinator for a recorded project that was targeted at ensuring that we actually have this cleanup. Now, so the cleanup was informed as part of the efforts of government and international community to restore confidence in the Niger Delta, and also to alleviate some of the suffering there of the people. And so it came from that UNEP report, the famous UNEP report of 2011. And but between 2011 and 2016 or thereabout, nobody did anything on this. So CODID, with support from the Dutch government, Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, came up with this project that I was a part of and I led with a couple of organizations, including St. LSD, by the way. to advocate that this process needed to get off the ground and needed to be implemented and needed to bring succor to the people of the region. So that's in terms of the thinking behind it. And the Nigerian government, to be fair, was committed to that process in the era, I think, 2015 and so on, when IPREP was put in place. IPREP was being capacitated in some form. So that's the vision, to restore the region. And we knew that this was going to take a long time. In fact, some estimates say it's going to take 30 years for some of the regions, the groundwater, the vegetation to come back to life. So it was a big task that needed to be completed, especially because of the history and because of what has gone before. So I think essentially we can trace it to what was contained in that UNEP report of 2011, which didn't get acted upon seriously until around 2016, 2017 era.
All right. So I'm just wondering, from 2016, we're in 2025, has there been any form of improvement in terms of implementation of the UNEP report?
Okay, so I would say yes. It's okay. Is it at the level that we would expect it to be? Maybe no, but there's been significant improvement. I've followed the region since, so the project I mentioned earlier closed in 2020, and that was just before COVID hit. And since then, I've also followed development because most of the people now lead IPREP, particularly the national coordinator, is a friend and somebody that we were in this struggle together, and was very clear about some of the activities that needed to take place for people to believe that, or to restore trust in government's promise. So I would say yes, to an extent, we've got positive movement in the right direction. But can it be better? Absolutely yes. Can it be faster? If we can, yes.
All right. So of course, in the whole of the cleanup launch, there are major key players. So how would you assess these major key players who are involved in the cleanup, and what roles do they play, and how have they played their roles so far? So these are like three questions in one.
Yes, I told you you're an expert in jam questions. So I think primarily the key stakeholders here will look at the Nigerian government and Shell as its joint venture partner. We'll look at HyPrep, which is the engine between which we want to get this done. We'll also look at key institutions of government like NOSDRA, NESRIA. We'll look at those roles. We'll also look at the Ogoni communities themselves, right? Community leaders, community youth. These are critical stakeholders, because I remember at some point there were times where the people got so frustrated that even when IPREP wants to show up, they don't want to see that because the promises have just kept coming and stayed in the pipeline for almost forever. So to look at how everybody has performed, I think within the limits of reason and how things move, particularly in our climb, it would be a mixed result for me for an organization like IPREP. It didn't start with the best of agility, like I use that word, but things have improved. I know based on media reports and some of the contacts that I have on the ground, that significantly a number of the very simple sites have been cleaned. We also have some level of mangrove restoration going on, particularly in places like Bodo and I think Boma, if I'm not mistaken. They used to call me an honorary of the Ogoni citizens, so I do know some of these names. Yeah. And so yes, those have been done, but there are still big issues, especially around water. When we were on the project, the water quality I think had 400 or 300 or 400 times the level of benzene that you should have in drinking water at the time. Wow. So water, provision of clean potable water was a big deal. And I want to say, yes, there were a number of provisions, temporary issues were put in place, but that's still something that, for me, would be the real icing on the cake in terms of organic sugar, because water is life.
It is.
Right? Yeah. And so if you look at that, I would say it's a mixed bag. For the Nigerian government, the previous government, particularly under the leadership of Ajia Amina Mohammed, did a lot to kickstart this process, and we really worked with that government at the time. The money was provided, but we didn't see a lot of traction in the early days of IPEP. There are still a number of issues in terms of how IPEP will do things like the Center of Excellence, which is what should help inform similar processes in the rest of the Niger Delta. So these are big chunks of the work that I still, based on what I follow in the media and some of the conversations I'm having, are still outstanding. So, and I also like to commend the Ogoni people for being patient and staying the course. I know there have been issues of repollution because sometimes this site is clean, then people go back and break new pipelines, or even the old pipelines that have been unserviced or unserviceable start to leak again. So because the process has been drawn out so long, it's difficult to really track and be fair to all of the stakeholders. Okay. I think in terms of regulatory bodies, most of the time when we were engaged directly, when you call them, they do show up to perform their the regulatory functions in terms of certifying sites and so on. So overall, I would just give an average mark for all of this, maybe all of this process, because people are still there living with some of this pollution, and until it is done, it is not done.
Wow. Okay, now this talk about revamping the ecosystem. What does it look like in practice in the Niger Delta? Because, I mean, we hear a lot of conversations around the revamp of the ecosystem, but for some of us who have not been there really to look at what's on ground, what is it like in practice?
So, traditionally, the Niger Delta has relied on what we now call blue economy, living off the water and the aquatic environment. So certain species disappeared because of this. Also, periwinkles disappeared from something is called mama coco, right? The mangroves, really, which was the real ecosystem restorer, it was also lost. Now, in some parts of Ogoni, I believe, based on what some of my friends have told me who are from Ogoni, based on the restoration of the mangroves that has now taken place, they are now finding that some of these species are coming back. So people can now have a bit of what life used to be before the oil spills destroyed the environment. So when you say what will it look like, it will look like some of these species come back and people can have livelihoods of them. So we did some livelihood research to find out what can people do. Cool. Especially because they've traditionally lived off the water, lived off the resources of the environment. And if this environment is destroyed, some of those resources are gone. So when you talk about some of these traditional foods, once they come back, again, Nigeria today, we're dealing with a high food inflation environment, right? And if people can get what is local and easy for them to mint, it helps to reduce the level of the impact of the inflation on the average pay. So these are some of the things that would impact people directly. Immediately, there's a restoration and they can begin to have access to some of the traditional resources of the waterways.
Okay, are there any success stories or positive examples of land or water being restored in that region?
Hey, but the majority possibly they good from others.
No, that's a. So I'll say 10. Yeah, it stands like the things.
Oh, there are lots of we didn't catch up and scatter you.
Oh, you didn't catch it in Saturday.
Can I? I think no. Well, you should start this out. I'm good at it.
Okay, so are there success stories or positive examples of land or water being restored in that region?
Okay, so I think that there was something that was emerging by the time we were living. I mean, 2020, when the project that I led was ending, that around, I think, the Bodo community, the Vomu creeks, right now, I believe there's significant restoration of the mangroves on those places. Another key success story with the provision of water. So there was some of the conversation about, look, while we wait for this remediation to happen, let's provide access to potable water. Initially, they were sending tankers. That was not sustainable. So now I think in some communities, there are now wells
Okay.
that have been dug where people can can have access to water. And this
As you know, water is clean enough.
well enough for in the places that there are some like care this because the West do some testing to make sure that and I think recently IPREP was reporting that up to 560 hectares of mangrove cover has been provided, which means there is some level of restoration. Like I said at the beginning, this will take time. And so baby steps, but things are moving in pockets of build examples of things that are happening there. So on the waterfront, some communities, I believe, are based on what I've been told, have water restored at least via wells that are safe. A lot of the creeks around the Bodo, Bomu axis have also been restored, the mangroves there. And altogether, I think over 500 hectares of mangroves have been replanted, which is significant. And it shows that things can happen when we are committed and consistent.
Now, in all of these conversations, the most heat in this challenge is, of course, the community. Now, what role should local communities play in all of these efforts? Are they being heard? Are there things that communities should also do to get the situation?
So, I'll be very careful to answer that on behalf of the community.
So, okay.
Because he who wears the shoe, he knows where into approach. These communities have actually endured a lot. And to be fair, in those early days, getting the communities to even accept that somebody can come in and train was a big deal. Now, what can communities do? Also to maintain the peace and have those dialogues around what needs to be done. But I don't want to put that on the communities alone because there's really very little they can do. My charge today will be to our friends in IPREC that they should continue some of the good work they're doing around community engagement, because when people are informed and understand what's happening, it's easier for them to be patient. However, repollution, I understand, is happening in some of the communities. I would ask that as much as possible, that should be something that it is stopped with leaders in the communities. And we know who the community members are. You do some of these things. And so asking the communities to continue to be patient needs also that they need to see signs that things are going to change. And I believe one of the areas that we actually strengthened capacity in those days was in that community engagement piece, because that was critical. You need, in the extractive industry, there's something we call the license to operate, social license to operate. That was something that broke down when he had all of the issues in the 80s and the 90s. That social license to operate, IPREP also wins it, to continue the good work that they're mandated to do, and which I believe they are also committed to, because most of the people who are leading now are Polish citizens themselves. So we know their address, and they also know that there's a lot riding on this for them. So I want to commend them because it's not an easy job to do.
All right. So ICREP's work in the Niger Delta region has been described to be at a slow pace. Do you agree?
You need to understand that. So some of the very heavily impacted regions, as at 2020, 2021, that I was really close to the project and its administration, I will say to you that to go to the next level in terms of the impacted sites, you needed specialized nurse.
And ICREP does not have that.
As at that time, no. Because it was not just, so we have people who have the knowledge of what needed to be done. But having the technical capacity to do it would also need to be complemented with equipment. So there needed to be that center of excellence where we could extract things from the ground, purify it, and bring it back. All of that requires building things, setting things up. So when you say it is slow, you have to put it in the context of what's needed to. So in the early days of IPREP, there was basically no capacity to do that. So you could argue that this was why. Now things have significantly improved. We've got a solid technocrat in the business right now running the organization. And I believe from what I've seen and some of the conversations I've had, that things are moving quite faster than it used to be.
Oh, okay. Which also brings me to my last question on this podcast. So, looking ahead, what needs to change to accelerate the cleanup and also ensure lasting ecological recovery?
So to accelerate the cleanup, there has to be focused energy on getting some of the next level expertise into preparation. IPrep itself needs to continue to enjoy support at the very high level, but then go for to make sure that it has the bandwidth to move as quickly as it should move. So I don't want to go into a lot of details around it because it's also a political process, right? And so the politics of it requires that people lay down some boundaries and also allow some flexibility for things to move as quickly as they should. I won't say more than that. It's a complicated process, but one that is doable, and in the interest of the wider Niger Delta, we need to get it right today.
So, if you were to advise the Nigerian government and, of course, Hyper and other institutions that are working, towards the cleanup of the Niger Delta and the revamp of the ecosystem, what would that advice be?
That we are not there yet. We can't shake our eyes off the ball. And every critical stakeholder needs to stay focused on ensuring that he can do this quickly. Because even as we speak, there are other parts of the Niger Delta that are being polluted, that we need to look at. We don't seem to see the results because it's far removed from the realities of everyday drama in Nigeria. The people are actually bearing the brunt of this pollution on a daily basis. It is impacting their lives health-wise, in terms of even their human capacity and attainment, their mental health, their financial livelihoods, and so on. So a lot is riding on it. And I think the charge would be, if we've been running at 50%, you need to now start probably running at 90 so that we can get paid 100.
Yeah. All right, that is all we have on this podcast. My guest has been Dr. Akin Oke,
Yes, you got it right time.
Leadership and Innovation Strategist, also a co-founder of Easy Data Consulting Limited. And the discussions have been around the cleanup of Ogoniland and, of course, the revamp of the ecosystem in the Niger Delta. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, my name remains Tracy Iheze. Bye.